This could look like brain imaging. So we'll take pictures of their brain to see what it looks like on the inside. We could also take samples of the fluid in their spinal cord or even their blood. And so once we have a proper idea of the scope of their disease stage, then we'll say, okay, how do we treat it? Now, there's no concrete treatment for Alzheimer's disease, but there are disease-slowing agents. A couple of drugs have just been approved by the FDA for this. You can also do lifestyle modifications like eating the Mediterranean diet and exercising more. Healthy lifestyle habits like cognitive stimulation, so using your brain a lot, regular exercise, and eating a diet that's healthy for your heart might help manage your Alzheimer's disease risk and your cardiovascular disease risk. So you're hitting two birds with one stone. And this is a major global public health challenge, especially in aging populations. It's mostly prevalent in North America and Europe. And this, interestingly, is because in North America and Europe, life expectancy is longer. So when people live longer, it means that they're more susceptible to diseases like Alzheimer's. Now, how we study Alzheimer's is really depends on the kind of scientist you are. I work in the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. And so there's a couple different ways we can do it. Now, in the past, the only way to diagnose Alzheimer's disease was to do an autopsy. So this means that once a person had passed, you would cut open their brain, if you can see over here. And that's what a healthy brain looks like on the left. And on the right, that's a brain with severe Alzheimer's disease. And as you can see, the brain with severe Alzheimer's disease is a lot smaller. So that means a lot of the brain cells have died. This is a really good way of seeing, okay, does this person have Alzheimer's? But there is one problem with it, and that's that the person has already passed away. So it doesn't really help us if we're trying to prevent the disease. So another way we can look at if a person has Alzheimer's is we'll take a photo of their brain. So on the left, this big colorful scan, that's called a PET scan. And on the left side, you see a person with normal aging, and on the right side, you see a person with Alzheimer's disease. And as you can see, the person with Alzheimer's disease has a lot of red spots in their brain, and that shows us where the toxic proteins are. Now, this is a really cool scam. The only problem is it's really expensive to do, and it involves injecting somebody with a radioactive substance because we need to be able to see these toxic proteins light up. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want to be injected with a radioactive substance. Now, to the right of that is another kind of brain scan. It's called an MRI, and that's showing us very similar to an autopsy, how the size of the brain changes. So on the extreme left, you have somebody with a normal brain. In the middle, you have somebody who's like beginning the cognitive decline. And on the right, you have somebody with Alzheimer's. And this is really cool. And you can see the size of the brain change. But all that means is their brain cells have died. You don't really know why. So to help us figure out why the brain cells have died without injecting people with, radioactive substances, like in Alyssa's example, where they use blood tests to figure out if people have malaria, neurologists thought, what if we can do the same thing with Alzheimer's? And now we look at patients with cognitive impairment and we'll take a blood sample. And then we'll try and figure out what's the probability that they'll get Alzheimer's, because the toxic proteins I mentioned that are in their brain can actually leak into their bloodstream. And so based on if they have a lot of toxic proteins in their blood, we'll say, there's a low probability of them having Alzheimer's. In the middle, we'll say, okay, maybe there's some probability of them, and we'll take them to a specialist clinic. And at the top, we'll say there's a higher probability, and that's for sure is Alzheimer's. So what do I do in this? Well, I'm a dry lab scientist, and that means that I don't work in the lab. But once we get all these amazing blood samples and brain samples from people, I sit and analyze them on my computer. Before that, though, I need to understand what I'm looking at. You can't be a dry lab scientist without understanding where your numbers are coming from. So in this picture over here, on the left, you have a neuron, that's a brain cell, and all those funky little spots around it are the toxic proteins. Next to it, you can see how these proteins show up in your cerebrospinal fluid. So that's the fluid in your spinal cord. And next to that, you can see how it shows up in your blood. So I work at the last stage, in the blood stage. Like I mentioned, I'm a dry lab scientist. So once I have all this data, I work on data analysis and I model things. And what I model is based on people's blood. What is the probability that they will get Alzheimer's disease? And I actually don't look at people with Alzheimer's. I look at completely healthy people to try and figure out in completely healthy people, if they have these proteins, what is the probability they'll get Alzheimer's? And one specific type of technique I use is called the mixtures analysis. And so in a mixtures analysis, you have a lot of different molecules that you're looking at. And because they're all correlated with each other, that means they're all very similar. In mathematical models, those are really difficult to digest. So what I do is I break those down to look at them individually and then together like a whole mixture to see what is the contribution of each of these toxic proteins in the blood instead of just looking at one by itself. So Alyssa and I both talked about the work we do, the questions we're interested in asking, and the answers that we're trying to find. But we're very different scientists. I work in a dry lab, she works in a wet lab. I look at Alzheimer's, which is a chronic disease, and she looks at malaria, which is an infectious disease. So even though we're both super different, we both use a scientific method. And we both ask questions, we both test hypotheses, and we both interpret results. In Alyssa's lab, her wet lab, this could mean doing bench science, so cell culture, or something called the polymerase chain reaction. That's better for studying biological mechanisms, and it's used in infectious disease and molecular biology. I work in a dry lab, so that's better for data modeling, bioinformatics, or simulating. It's ideal for trying to find patterns and trends, and it's common in chronic disease epidemiology and genomics.
And overall, a takeaway that we want you guys to have from our talk is that there are many careers in science, and science can look very different. Just because you study biology doesn't mean you have to be a doctor or you have to go into teaching. You know, you can do research, and research can look like many different things. You can be, again, like Anya said, a dry lab scientist or a wet lab scientist. You can work in health policy. You can not be in the lab at all, but you can still be involved in health and science as well. But some next steps for you would basically include to reflect on your interests. Are you more interested in wet lab or dry lab, or maybe a hybrid? Build your skills to kind of bolster you in this field. So do you want to get into coding or lab techniques, or maybe both? Network, which means, you know, talk to people, meet new people in the field, professors, look for internships, go to conferences if possible. Then try to gain experience, you know, if that's a research assistantship or volunteering in a lab. And ultimately, you know, stay curious, read, ask questions, and explore beyond the syllabus. Like Anya said, we use the scientific method in our everyday lives without even noticing it. But continue that curiosity, because it's really important for us to have diverse minds in science, to approach questions from different perspectives. Yeah, so thank you guys for listening.
Thank you for listening.